Welcome, everybody, to today's session. We've got Rachel DeGraw joining us. We're going to be talking about staying human in the AI world, customer experience consultant and guru. Rachel, thanks so much for joining. How are you?
Hi, Gabe. I'm well. How are you? I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, this is so fun. I think this topic, as I was saying, is kind of like we need it. So let's get into it. Before we dive into the topic at hand, maybe tell us a little bit about some of the fun things you've been up to.
Yeah, so I spent the last decade of my career in early stage startups, and recently I started consulting, which was really nerve-wracking, really scary, but the best thing I've ever done.
Awesome.
And so
Awesome.
working with a company called PetPlate right now as a consultant and a customer called a client called Evie, which is a vaginal microbiome testing kit for women. So really
Yeah.
exciting, and I'm just loving it.
Yeah, well, again, congratulations on the jump. I think with your background, I'm sure you're going to hit a home run, but that is never easy. I've never had the guts to do it, so I assume it's never easy. But it seems like it's not easy. So kudos for making the jump. Um, all right, well, let's dive into this topic. AI and humanization. You've talked about some things in the past around the magic is in the details, and I'm curious how you feel like brands can preserve those details when AI is, kind of involved or handling some of the steps, first step, last step, middle step. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so just a little background. I started my career in luxury retail. So much of what I've done over the last 10 years has been ingrained in those very special moments. So
Yeah,
AI for me has been actually quite challenging. A little
because
scary.
you're all the ultra. That's like ultra personalization, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, it was not an easy acclimation for me. But what I've realized is I think for many people, they feel the same way.
Yeah.
And there are so many platforms out there that there's a group that maybe is just going to move really fast and not offer you the best experiences. But there are so many platforms out there that actually are meant to add proactiveness to the
Hmm.
CX experience rather than reactiveness,
Interesting.
which is what I'm kind of loving and enjoy diving into.
Look, I think that, I mean, that's like the holy grail. I don't know if there's a better word, but that's like the holy grail of service, I think, is to solve the problem before the customer knows about it, And so I've really liked this idea of trying to get from the reactive to proactive service. I think you're right. AI could probably do that in a way that maybe we haven't been able to do as much before. I like that. Do you feel, as you're around some of these tools, is there any red flags you found when you look for evaluating AI tools that claim to be more human centric?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first and the big one is tone.
Yeah.
So while you're doing the testing phase, really understanding if that tone can be changed. Is the tone customer centric? Is it warm? Is it empathetic? Because there are a lot of platforms that claim to be, but they're not. They're hard coded and very generally stated, and that's when the customer, I think, becomes frustrated. So really evaluating the tone and making sure that over time, as your business grows, the tone can change with that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, these are such a direct reflection of your brand. I don't know if a lot of AI tools allow you as much to play with that. I was talking with one the other day that was talking more about that point. That's interesting you bring that up because I felt like it was a little newer concept for me, which is like, rather than just always talking about automating everything and no tickets and deflecting everything. And they were talking a lot about how can we make this AI agent match your brand tone or your personality, and so that it feels like an extension of your brand rather than just this kind of weird bot experience. I hadn't heard that before. I was like, yeah, I'm glad you guys are talking about that. That's something more that's as valuable as just making sure that we kind of get every service request automated out of that. Interesting tone. How do you feel like companies tone? I mean, can you train that? Can you that was kind of my follow-up. I was like, I love the idea. I'm like, what personality would I want it to be, or what tone do I want it to be, or how do I think about that? Do you have any quick thoughts on that one?
Yeah. So I think really doing your research. There are plenty of AI platforms out there, but there are ones that specifically cater to direct to consumer models.
Hmm.
I would say this is a very general statement, but the client who services a ton of B2B customers and software clients isn't may not be the software
Hmm.
that you're going to use for a direct to consumer subscription model.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's may not be the platform you use for a women's healthcare company. So there are plenty out there. It's just a matter of researching and vetting out the ones that supply different business organizations. And
I
what
love
you'll see is if there's a trend, so say you're in medical, right? There has to be certain like HIPAA or a level of empathy to certain conversations. You're going to see a large group of medical providers using that platform.
it. Mm, mm, I like that. I
Same,
like finding, yeah, something that tailors a little more to your industry or vertical a little more. Yeah, that makes
yeah, and there is. I've actually spoke to two in the last 2 weeks that claim to have tone automation, and there's one that specifically I was just blown away
yeah.
by how much empathy they could communicate in their AI.
Wow, that's cool. That's really cool. Um, one of the things that's coming up in these conversations in a world where everyone is automating everything, how do brands, um, or maybe I'd start here, the team concept. There's so many teams that are nervous that AI might replace them, not empower them. How are you helping companies kind of think through that, or what's your take on guiding teams through that change?
Yeah, so really great question, and something that when I first started using I felt the same way. How is this going to replace? This is going to replace me. This is going to replace my job. This is going to replace like the people that
I think
I,
we all have. We've all thought that. We've all had one of
yes.
those sleepless nights or waking up with a cold sweat.
Yeah. Yes. So, what I've kind of uh, dove into is like, okay, what in direct to consumer is this low hanging fruit? Like, what are the commonalities?
Yeah,
And many of the commonalities are return, general questions, how to cancel my subscription, right? And
sure.
what I found is that using these AI tools, you can automate much of that. So the low hanging fruit that 60% of your CX team is doing, you could automate that, right? Then there's this other more complex group of questions that are more tier three related that don't get the TLC that they really need, right? And those are your retention customers. And so freeing up your team's time to focus on the issues that matter is outstanding. Now they don't have to just use a macro. They can actually freehand certain communications because they don't have an inbox that's full of how do I cancel my subscription?
It's so true. It's like you can never get to the important. I find that in my own life, actually. It's like I could never get to the important stuff because I'm always like doing the checkbox type items that, are running around the house and getting this or that done, and some of the bigger items get missed. So I like that. I like that framing. Do you feel like that's something that companies are starting to adopt more, or there's still just a lot of nervousness about the replace idea?
I do feel like companies are starting to adopt that more. There's this, there's a difference between support and experience. And I think more companies are leaning into what is experience? How does it integrate with other departments? Um, and this is that. And by freeing up your agent time, you can actually focus on things that drive retention and give them a bigger budget.
Yeah.
So the budget may not be needed for a headcount necessarily, but it can be used for these amazing surprise and delight programs that no one ever has time to do that they want to do, like restructuring your loyalty program and how is your CX team integrated in that. So those really special moments we can actually care about
I
rather
love
than
it.
saying like putting the Band-Aid on.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. That's a great framing. Okay, back to the brands for just a second. So, I was kind of thinking about this, but in a world where we're all automating, how do you think brands can stay personal in this AI first world? Thoughts on finding that balance?
Yeah, so I think kind of what I was mentioning before is just really looking at the low-hanging fruit, right?
Yeah,
Making sure that low-hanging fruit is automated, easy, quick,
yeah,
like almost these instant gratification moments, right? Which will just drive general customer happiness,
Yeah.
but also personalizing in these conversations,
Yeah.
right? Utilizing the customer's name, utilizing a bit of storytelling, um, maybe connecting on uh, a product that they purchased, right?
Yeah.
In the AI, acknowledging that you know what they purchased, but not saying like, I saw your order is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Yeah.
really saying we love that product. It's one of our best selling features or something like that.
Yeah, that makes tons of sense. I think there's a way. I think there'll be a way to find the balance of kind of personalization and automation here. A lot of companies are wondering where to start on this journey. I think you've given a couple places, and if you have any stories, always welcome to share examples of that. That's always fun. But the the idea of starting, we're hearing we need to do AI, we're hearing we need to do personalization. If you had a new brand and they were just trying to get going on that journey, any advice you'd give them to kind of get moving and shaking?
Yeah. So, um, I think the first part is really just networking. I know there's competition
Mhm.
out there with most direct-to-consumer businesses, but if you look at your competition and you can see what they're doing really well and maybe where their opportunity is, that's a huge gain for you.
Yeah.
And I have found that by networking and being involved with my competition, they have been so generous in terms of what platforms they're using,
Cool.
what's been working, what
I
hasn't been
love that.
working, where
I love
they've been
that.
struggling. Um,
Yeah,
I think economically, this is just a time that everyone's a little uncertain
it
about.
is. It really is. Yeah.
So I've found that people have been kind of wonderful in the sense of sharing information and where they've seen opportunities and where they've seen loss.
Yeah. Yeah. I really think I think we've heard a lot from different groups. Yeah. There's so many things changing. There's so many feeling overwhelmed at times. They feel alone at times. A lot of people are working remote or hybrid, and so that idea of alone and getting out of that and being like you're not alone, but you got to find a group or a person to kind of connect with, and you'll find I think a lot of people are dealing with the same challenges, but within that some people have some interesting ideas and you don't have to go at this alone. I think that's just a great piece of advice for a lot of our audience who's trying to kind of navigate all these uncharted waters.
Yeah.
um as we look to kind of to start to wrap here, you've been in the space kind of as a practitioner, obviously as a consultant. I just a lot of trends, a lot of things kind of going on. Um, we've got CX leaders who are facing a lot of the same challenges. I think you're seeing day to day. What any leave behinds you kind of give them or advice as we kind of wrap today?
Yeah. The space is moving so fast. It's growing so quickly. Automation is growing so quickly. Don't lose the humanity.
Yeah.
If, many of us in this space do this role because, we perform well with empathy. We
Yes.
care about people. We care about our teams. And that's why many of us started this. Many
Yeah.
of us didn't just like go to school to do this, right? You end up with this. And so don't lose the empathy. If it doesn't feel right, if it feels too automated, if you can anticipate that your customers are going to be disappointed, don't do it because there's someone else who does it better
Yeah.
and who's going to make it work for you and your business.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right. That's such a great pulse check on where people might be in their business. And you're right, so many of us come from that empathetical world. If it feels like it's crossing a boundary, don't lose the human when you do the scale. I love that. Okay, well, Rachel, again, really appreciate you taking the time. I think it's a fun talk track, very relevant to I think our audience as they navigate, as I said, some of these uncharted waters. So again, appreciate you taking the time. For the audience, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, Gabe, thank you. Be well.